mostly. I've lived in New York City all my life, except for when I went to college, which wasn't that far away either. And I love New York City. I've again, I grew up there. I've made money there. I've gone broke there several times over. I've met my wife there, and I'm sad to be leaving, but there was lots of things that went into the decision, and we really tested it out. Like we stayed in different places for a while. We stayed in Key Biscayne, Florida for a while, and just decided. And this was after the pandemic, after the lockdowns. We were in New York City for the pandemic. We were in the city for all the protests and um, marches and things like that. But then ultimately, we decided, look, you could live anywhere you want now, and there's creativity and innovation everywhere. The fact that people are leaving urban areas means that not only are people spreading out throughout the country, but talent is now spreading out throughout the country. Creativity, innovation is spreading out throughout the country. There's no more one place you have to be. Like, you don't have to be in Silicon Valley for technology. You don't have to be in New York City for media or finance. You don't have to be in LA for entertainment. The world is getting more decentralized, and you could basically be wherever you want. And that also applies to what you want to do. Like, everything got scattered in terms of, what do I do for a living? How do I do my passions? Everything sort of became decentralized even with that. So you could choose to do whatever you want now wherever you want. Like, because everybody was left in the cold more or less, during this past year. We had to figure
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah, it's so interesting because my husband and I, like I told you offline, we ended up in Massachusetts, and we were just staring at each other a couple months ago, and we said, "Why are we here?" Because we've ever since lockdown, the kids are in remote schooling, he's working from home, everyone's in my office. I used to have the house to myself, and I'm like, "What are all y'all doing here?" And it's just interesting you say, we could live anywhere. And so my husband's over there always scrolling. He's like, what about Guatemala? He's like, how about Australia? And I'm like, dude, like, calm it down. We could do that some other time. But I mean, it is an interesting world when that changes, when your choices open up. And so I think it's cool that, you're listening to it, we're listening to it. And, it's definitely been a heck of an adventure.
But by the way,
So,
you said your choices open up. I think we always had the choices,
mm,
but we were kind of hypnotized, myself included, that you had to be in a certain location to do what you wanted, or to make money, or you had to work for a certain company because you had to have loyalty, and you had to it looked good on the resume if you were there for a while, or you had to
right.
work for a company even instead of making money on your own. I mean, corporation was the safe choice, is what everybody thought. And yet, 55 million people out of 120 million workers filed for unemployment in the past year. And that's a shame, given that we've been told forever, oh no, corporations are the safe route, as opposed to trying to figure out how to make money on your own, or corporations are loyal to you if you're loyal to them. Well, guess what? We were all loyal. We moved to a house near our corporations. We commuted to work unpleasantly to get to our corporations. And they were like, sorry, guys, everybody's got sick. And so we have to lay everyone off forever.
Right.
It's been really
Right.
sad for so many people. It's horrible. But the flip side is, you're right. Now we're at least aware that we have more choices, and so many exciting things have been done by people during this. And this is not to say we all had a homework assignment like, you better make use of this time or else.
Right.
But I think whether you made use of the time or not doesn't matter. But we all became aware that our time is our own now, and it's not controlled by some corporation or some government or whatever.
Right. Right. So part of what you do is to interview peak performers and very successful people, and get their stories and find out what your phrase is choose yourself, the choose yourself story, the moments that we relate to when people rise up from their personal struggle to reinvent themselves, and nothing more on topic than that exact thing. So who have you talked to, or what have you learned in this past year talking to people about their choose yourself story, especially right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because basically everyone who is successful is the wrong word, because lots of people are successful. Uh, uh, Everybody who's a peak performer, who's like one of the best in the world at what they do, and have been able to monetize it, they've all have many things in common. Whether it's during this pandemic or beforehand, I've interviewed probably over 1,000 people on my podcast, and they all have figured out a way to do what I call skip the line, which is the title of my latest book. And what that means is whenever you try to do something unique to you, whether it's pursuing a passion, or doing something that's, switching careers midstream, or even in your 20s, doing a career that has nothing to do with your education, finding out what your passion is and deciding to pursue it. Someone's always going to tell you, you can't do that. Meredith, you can't move down to Georgia. You had a job, you built up a life in Boston, and you've been doing this for 15 years. What are you going to do down there? You can't suddenly switch from being an accountant to a sports journalist, or, I'm making that one up, but you can't suddenly go from being a 70-year-old professor to being an astronaut. And here's the thing. And this is what I've noticed, not only with myself, but with many of the guests I've had on my podcast, but with myself in particular, is that anybody who tells you you can't do something, it's what they're really saying, and this is not a bad thing. I feel bad for them. They're saying they can't do that.
Right.
And they don't want you to change. They want you to be the same Meredith you always were and have the same relationship with them that you always had, because they haven't been able to do it. And they don't want you to, subconsciously even, they don't want you to do what you think is your dream. So they have all sorts of reasons they've rationalized for themselves that they then spew out onto you. And the reality is, success is only on the other side of you can't do it. I mean, think about it. How many people, let's just take the president of the United States. How many people took what you would consider to be the normal path to become president of the United States? And by normal path, I mean, there's always considered historically, first you're a congressman, then a senator, then you might be vice president, then president. And you kind of build up, before and after. So probably the last person who had a traditional route to the presidency was someone like John F. Kennedy. He was a congressman, then a senator, and then president. And by the way, it took him 12 years from beginning to end of that, because his dad had billions of dollars. And that helps.
Right.
And so other than that, I don't really know of any president who took a traditional route. I mean, obviously Joe Biden took a somewhat traditional route, but he ran for president many times before he succeeded. And, he had some time off in between these various runs. And Trump obviously didn't take any traditional route. Obama was senator for 2 years, and before that he was a community activist, so he took a very odd route. Bush took the route of being the son of a president. That's a pretty good route. and on and on. You could go through every president. Nobody took the traditional path. And it's the same thing with every successful person. Let's take as an example, in entrepreneurship, Richard Branson. So Richard Branson's biggest company was Virgin Air, his airline. Well, he started Virgin Air. He was a 27-year-old music publisher. Like that, he published music magazines, and that's all he did. And then he just decided one day, you know what? I'm going to create an airline. And there's no other airline. British Airways, which is a government-controlled monopoly, was the only airline in England. And he's like, you know what? Even though British Airways has been around since the dawn of aviation, and even though the government controls it, and so the government doesn't want any competition, and they run everything, I'm going to start an airline. And people said, you can't do that. You're a 27-year-old magazine publisher. What do you know about airplanes? And he's like, I don't know anything. So he calls up Boeing and says, can I borrow an airplane? And they're like, you can't borrow an airplane. What do you mean? You're a 27-year-old music magazine publisher who has have you even ridden on an airplane? Like, who are you? and he used persuasion skills. Obviously, he had to use persuasion skills to convince them to lend him an airplane. He convinced Heathrow Airport to lend him an airstrip, and JFK to land, or I think it was LaGuardia, to land him an airstrip. No, it was JFK actually. Sorry, to lend him an airstrip in the United States, and then suddenly he had an airplane. He had two places to take off and land, and he had an airline. And boom, it became. He sold it a couple years ago for billions of dollars to Alaska Air, on the condition that they never changed the name of Virgin Air to Alaska Air, which they did almost immediately. And now he has Virgin Galactic. Now a music magazine publisher is making an airline into space. So when someone tells you you can't do it, you can do it. Like Sarah Blakely, started the underwear company Spanx, and she was selling fax machines door to door. She didn't know how to make a piece of clothing, how to manufacture them, how to sell them, how to design them. She was a fax machine sales lady door to door. And then one time she was at a show. She had one kind of sample of what she was doing, and Neiman Marcus liked it, so they gave her something like a $300,000 order, and they said, "Can you do it?" And she said yes. She had no clue. She didn't know how she
Right.
was going to manufacture $300,000 worth of these Spanx. And every manufacturer she went to they were like, "You can't do this. You don't know anything, and we can't make this and assume that you're going to sell it. Like, you're a big risk." But she was able to convince someone to do it, and once she made that first sale, she was off to the races. And now I gave some business examples, but I'll give an example from my own life. Like, first off, I've created businesses, sold them, made a lot of money, and then completely went broke, like down to zero several times. And every single time I wanted to make the money back or start a business, and people told me, "You can't do it. You kind of won the lottery with that first business. You're never going to make that money back." And, there's various ways in which I've done it. But then more recently, I decided, you know what? I kind of want to be a stand-up comedian out of nowhere. Like, I was 45 years
I
old.
said that a couple weeks ago to my husband. I said, I think I want to be a stand-up comedian. And he's like, you can't do that.
You can't do it. You're not going to make any money doing that. And people have been doing it for 30 years, and they still are waiting for their first Netflix
Right.
special or whatever, or waiting to go on the road. So I remember, so this was like 6 or 7 years ago. Well, I'm 19. I'm 53 years old now, so maybe it started when I was like 46, and that's an old, the successful comedians that we all know about have been doing it for 15 to 20 years. And I remember one time I was about to do my first 60-minute show. So it was a big deal for me. It was after I'd been doing it for 1 year. And this guy, another comedian, said, "Look, James, I've been doing this 25 years. You can't do this. Don't think you can skip the line." And he said, like, I ride a Verizon truck during the day, and I come out and do 4 or 5 shows a night. And the guy's a very funny guy, but I don't know. He's never really.
Oh, James, I think your microphone might have come unplugged.
Uh-oh.
Oh, there you go. You're back. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You said he was driving a truck and then you went away.
So he was driving a Verizon truck during the day, and then doing 4 or 5 shows of comedy a night. And he was a very funny guy. Been doing it for 25 years, waiting for Verizon, his pension to start in a few years. And I remember thinking, like, why is he telling me this 30 seconds before I'm about to go up and do comedy for an hour for the first time? But okay, to each his own. And meanwhile, I did all the techniques in my book, Skip the Line. I was very much so. Long story short, I've been touring all over the world since then. I have gigs in Philadelphia, Kansas City, Cleveland, Cincinnati in the next couple of weeks, and Miami as well tomorrow. And so I got back from the Netherlands, where I toured all over the country right before, like, the day before the lockdown started here. And so everybody who told me you can't do it, and by the way, everybody told me, and everybody even told me you suck. And because to get good at anything worth getting good at, you're going to suck in the beginning, and that's part of the psychology of getting good, is to suck at it for a long time. For people to say, you can't do that. Who are you? And yet it is possible to choose yourself, to skip the line, and people just, they haven't been taught that. They don't know that it even exists. And so it's a blessing sometimes to lose all your money and have to restart when you're broke and you have a mortgage to pay and kids to feed, and you lose your home and the IRS is calling. It feels horrible, and it feels suicidal almost. But sometimes, a phoenix rises out of the ashes. I'm
Yeah.
more like a little crow, but at least, uh, at least I've risen out of some ashes.
Oh my gosh. So two things came to mind when you were talking is I decided like 8 years ago that I was going to do an Ironman distance triathlon. And I have no endurance background whatsoever. Not a runner, not a swimmer, not a biker.
Wow.
And a lot of people, like all I heard was like, wait, you're like 230, you're a fat girl and you want to do a race that's made for thin people and you don't swim or bike or run. And I was like, yeah, that's right. That's what I'm going to do. And so I did, and I did three more, and I wrote a book about it. And, people are like, well, you can't write a book about this. You don't know anything. And, so I have been doing this in practice too, is just picking up things. And then everyone's like, why would you do that? Well, you can't do that. And I don't know if it's the psychology of people going through the hard knocks themselves that they want you to suffer. Like that comedian, he's like, well, I've been doing this so many years, you should suffer like me, like I have. I mean, there's some of that going on. Like you haven't really made it until you've suffered like the people who've come before you. But
Yeah.
what my current sort of choose yourself situation is we're selling our house and we're doing it by owner, right? And so the experience of that is having everyone, all the agents in the world call you and tell you why you can't sell your house yourself, even though it's your house.
Yeah.
And you can do that if you want to. But it's just interesting how much of our world is built around and how much of our service industry and economy is built around other people telling us we can't manage our own money, we can't sell our own houses, we can't do a
You,
lot of things.
you're so right. Like, think about it. And a lot of this triggers cognitive dissonance. So even when we say, oh, well, you don't need to live in a city, people who have bought real estate in a city, like your house is for sale. Uh, People who have commitments in the city and they can't leave, and by the city I mean any city, they feel cognitive dissonance. Like, well, there's no place like my place, and I can't leave here. So I get it. But for instance, take home ownership. There's a $15 trillion mortgage industry, and that's the largest industry on the planet, basically. And of course, you're taught from childhood on, better to buy than to rent. And because there's a huge industry that's dependent on you thinking that way. So you're taught that from your parents, from the government, from schools, from your friends. There's a lot of peer pressure. Buy a house. I'm not saying it's good or bad to buy a house, but you have to look at it from every angle. Like, it's very good when you're making a decision to take the opposite view and try to argue it as hard as possible. So
Yes.
for instance, yes, there's a $15 trillion mortgage industry. So that must play a factor in people's decisions. Second, corporations have an incentive for you to own your home instead of rent, because they want it hard for you to leave, so that they control when you're fired, not you control when you leave. And uh, there's an entire industry of banks, lawyers, accountants, real estate agents, plumbers, electricians, who all depend on a vibrant, uh, 100 million people buying a home every year or so. And so it's you have to always. College is another one. During this
Yeah.
pandemic, we kind of saw that. Oh, you mean college is just the same thing for the same cost, even if it's only on Zoom? That's ridiculous. It shouldn't cost the same, and yet it does. And why has college tuitions gone up faster than inflation, by a factor of 10, every single year since student loans became government mandated? And so, of course, another multi-trillion-dollar industry relies on people thinking, well, if you don't go to college, you're not going to be educated. And I always ask people, well, what did you major in? And they tell me. And then I might ask them a totally basic question from what they majored in. Like, I met someone the other day, very smart guy, started a huge internet company, and very proud of his education and everything. And I said, what'd you major in? And he said, oh, I majored in European history. And I'm like, okay, well, when was Charlemagne born? And Charlemagne, of course, being the most important king in European history, he united, the first king in all of history and the only king to unite all of Europe. So, of course, we all learned about him in high school. In European history, probably in college, you learn about him all the time. Nobody has answered this question correctly within 500 years. And I actually am so bored of the question. I have to look it up every few months if I'm planning on asking it because I forget within 500 years. And so look it up if you want, whoever's listening to this, and try to guess first. And my guess is you're going to be wrong. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. It's because it's boring and it's unimportant for most things. So even if you majored in it, you only really remember the things that you're passionate about. And it's very hard to remember anything else. The brain's got a lot of work to do.
I know. See, I have an English degree and a law degree, and everyone likes to ask me what a gerund is. And I'm like, I don't know what a gerund is. Don't ask me what a gerund is. But it's funny.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
What
It's
is
like
a
an
gerund? I
adjective that
forget.
acts like a verb, or a verb that acts like an adjective, or an adverb that acts like a verb. I don't know. I don't know. I said, don't ask me. I don't know.
What's
Who knows? Who knows what a gerund is?
Oh, okay, hold on. I'm going to look it up because I'm fascinated now.
I just remember I had a hard time
Gerund.
in
A
diagramming
form that is
sentences.
derived from a verb but that functions. So, like, it's almost like the reverse of, like, Google. So, oh, I Googled it. That's a noun acting like a verb.
Yeah.
But the gerund is the opposite. It's a verb that becomes like a noun.
Oh, a noun, not an adjective. No, that would have been an adverb.
Like, do you mind my asking you?
Oh my gosh.
I still don't understand it. Like, here's a
Exactly.
sentence where the word asking is a gerund. Do you mind my asking you? Is asking a noun there?
Do you
It
mind
still
my
sounds like a verb.
asking you? Do you mind? Well, the
Anyway,
mind
all right.
is the verb, but see how you can just go down this rabbit hole with gerunds. They're fascinating. We're gonna have to have an expert on the podcast and discuss gerunds. But one of the things. So
Let's go dancing at the club tonight.
let's go dancing. Go is the verb. Dancing, yeah, 2 days. So it's like a double verb
Is
almost. Do you mind me asking? Let's go dancing. It's a double verb.
yeah.
I just made that up. I don't remember that anywhere in my education, but that is what we're gonna call it.
I don't remember that either.
I know, it's funny.
By the way,
But
so if you tell people college might not be the best choice for most people, they get very, very upset.
yeah,
Well, college, you need college or you can't get a job. Oh, really? Google, you don't have to have a college degree. Ernst and Young, the accounting firm, you don't have to have a college degree. More and more companies are saying you don't need a college degree. So that is not true. Well, you got to get a well-rounded education. Oh, really? If you don't remember anything, what good is it? But what if I'm interested in reading about the Civil War and Cubism and you know,
gerunds.
nuclear physics? I could be interested. Then I'll remember. Then I'll remember those things if I read about them. But I'm not going to remember like if I'm forced to take the Canterbury Tales in college. Like who wants to remember that?
Right, right. And I spent an ungodly amount of money to get a law degree, and all I could do was the 13 years I was practicing law was figure out how to get out of it. And everyone's like, "Well, you can't do that. You spent so much time." And I thought, I have 30 years ahead of me if I work till I'm 65, which I don't plan to do. So I can't leave. Like I have to stay because I made a choice when I was
Yeah. What
22
are you supposed to
years
do?
old,
Like,
you know? But that's the
yeah,
thing.
you're
That's
supposed
the
to wait until
mindset
you're dead, like to do what you want to do.
to do what I want to do. And so like I
Yeah,
meticulously planned
and the
my
whole thing is
exit.
like
I knew I could not work for 30 more years in the legal profession. And so it took me like 7 years to get out to like, and that's kind of BS when I really look back on it, but it was because of the beliefs around my life. And, I thought I had to do all this stuff, but I did have to, I did plan the exit and buck the system, but everyone told me I couldn't do it. You can't leave.
yeah. Well, first off, a lot of lawyers are in that position and they feel like, oh, I spent so much money on the degree. I've been building up to partner. I really can't quit now. But the reality is, if you don't like it, you're going to spend your entire life doing it, and then what? What's the point? Like then you're dead. And I'm not even saying this in some philosophical way. It's kind of important to do something you love doing because if you don't love doing something, every day we have a limited amount of energy to do things we need to do that day. That's why we sleep at the end of the day, is because it's hard to do things. And uh, the reason it's hard to do things is because if you don't enjoy doing something, part of the energy required to do it involves convincing yourself to do this. Like, oh, I got to sit down and be a lawyer today. Well, guess what? The people who don't have to convince themselves because they love it so much, they will do a better job because they require less energy to actually do things successfully, if that makes any sense. And
Yeah.
so if you don't enjoy being a lawyer, there's going to be 1,000 lawyers better than you because they enjoy doing it. And so they don't need the energy required to sit down and do it. And that's really important.
Yeah. Well, tell everyone about your book. Skip the line, right? How are we, like what you did with your comedian outfit, skipping the line.
Yes. So my book is basically, I was trying to figure out, how do people get really good at something, and particularly, how do you get good at something fast? Like, so Anders Ericsson is this professor. Well, Malcolm Gladwell popularized this idea of the 10,000 hour rule, that it takes 10,000 hours of what's called deliberate learning to be a master at something. And I was kept thinking to myself, well, how am I going to get, so the first time I needed to worry about this, I wanted to be a professional investor. I wanted to start a hedge fund. And I'm like, how am I going to start a hedge fund if, if I don't, somebody even said to me, you can't do that. You need like an MBA. You need to work at Goldman Sachs. You need to do blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't have any of those things. I was a computer science major, and then I made websites for a living. And then suddenly I wanted to be a hedge fund manager. And they're like, you can't just do that. And so it started then, my quest to figure out, like, why do people always say this to me? And I've switched careers a couple of times. I was a computer programmer. I worked at HBO, and I wanted to be in the TV business. I've started a company making websites. I started a hedge fund. I did all these things that everyone said, oh, well, you can't do that. And then when I started doing comedy, I was afraid, like, do I really need 10,000 hours to get good at comedy? I'll be 70 years old. And plus everyone was telling me you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. But everybody was upset at me, because it's not going to be an easy thing to make money with. And of course I do other things too. But I decided to really explore, is the 10,000 hour rule true, or is there some other thing I can rely on? And I really started examining what's made me a success in the past, what's made a lot of my podcast guests a success. And it really turned out that there was a lot of alternative ways to get into the top 1% in the world at something extremely quickly. And not only that, and a lot of books don't deal with this, like Malcolm Gladwell doesn't deal with this, or anybody writing books about learning don't deal with this. But if you're going to get really good at something and you want to switch careers, you have to learn how to monetize very quickly, or else you really can't do it unless it's just a hobby. And so part of my book is about how to avoid the 10,000 hour rule and get into the top 1% of any activity extremely quickly, whether it's making $1 million or starting an airline or being an author, or being a comedian or doing something in the sports industry. And then not only do you have to get good, but you have to get good at monetizing it. So you have to learn persuasion skills. You have to learn various methods of getting to the top of a particular industry or field. Not just the learning, but what is this field? Like, how does one get to the top? Who are the people that, help, what do you have to do to get to the top in an industry? And that's what the book's about. And it's pretty much based on my own experiences. And then, I don't like all these quasi self-help books that are, academic research shows that if you cross your legs in a meeting, then everyone else will cross their legs and they'll do what you say after that. And I've tried that and it doesn't work. And just like the 10,000 hour rule doesn't work, like, you kind of have to, sometimes you have to experiment for yourself to see what works. And so that's a big part also, is that to learn something new, it's really helpful to experiment, because it's not just good enough to be as good as everyone else. or be a little better than everyone else, you have to also bring something new to the table, whether it's an entire industry or whether it's a relationship or whatever. You have to you have to do something with your own unique voice and style, and that's a good way to skip the line. So an example might be, I have a friend who was uh, I'm thinking there's so many stories. I'm just trying to think of one thing. Well, Richard Branson's or Sarah Blakely with Spanx and Richard Branson with Virgin Air are good stories. Like Virgin Air had, the best customer service, the best seats, the most convenience, the cheapest airfares for a while. So he brought something new to the table. Sarah Blakely's Spanx are a way for women to seem thinner than they are by wearing these kind of tight underwear. But like another friend of mine during this pandemic, he was a bond trader for J.P. Morgan, and he thought that's what he was going to do for the rest of his life, but he didn't really enjoy it. And what he really enjoyed ever since he was a kid, like he enjoyed sports, but he's not going to be an athlete. He's in his 40s, and I could say you can't do that, but he said it himself. He didn't even really want to be an athlete at this point, but he just loves sports, but he worked in the finance industry. So during the pandemic, he had a lot of free time, and he started an email newsletter about interesting stories in sports that have a finance component. So, for instance, an example might be the Super Bowl. The halftime show was done by this musician named The Weeknd. And The Weeknd, it turns out he wasn't paid to do the halftime show for the Super Bowl. And not only wasn't he not paid, but he spent $7 million of his own money to produce the halftime show. Why would he do that? Turns out Beyonce also did that, and Maroon 5 also did that for prior Super Bowls. Why did they do that? So this guy went through the financials of that Super Bowl halftime, and then what happens to these bands or singers afterwards, and why it was a good decision for them to do what they did. So I've never even read a story like that before. And so very quickly, by intersecting two areas where he was competent at, sports and finance, he now has a newsletter with 27,000 subscribers. He quit his job at J.P. Morgan, where he traded bonds, and he's going to do this for the rest of his life, something he loves. He writes the newsletter. It's called Huddle Up. He writes that newsletter 5 days a week. It's a great skip-the-line story. He went right to the front of the line, not only on well, first off, he became number one in the world for writing about the intersection between sports and finance, and he's clearly in the top 1% of the world of people making a living from sports writing. It's probably in the top 100 of the world. And so that's a very exciting thing. And that's a classic story where it's not somebody famous, but it's just someone who just in the past 8 months skipped the line completely in sports writing and became among the top in the world and does it. And he was just a regular bond trader. There was nothing special about him. And I think everybody in the world has the capability of doing that. And I just know from my own story, like, I've been so down and out at different times. Like, I've been so stupid when it came to like managing my own money, particularly the first few times I made money selling a business or whatever. I would just blow it all. And I had to figure out what am I interested in doing now? Like, what am I going to do with my life, and how am I going to support my family? So I had to switch careers like 5 or 6 times, and not only get in the top 1% of that career fairly quickly, but also figure out how to monetize it. And it's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, tell everyone, I assume they can buy your book wherever books are sold, but unless that's not true.
No, you can buy
Usually
it
it's
everywhere.
true.
Yeah.
Usually it's true. But your podcast, because I know your podcast, that's how I found out about you. So tell everyone about your podcast and where they can find that.
Yeah, so my podcast is the James Altucher Show. You can find that anywhere where you can find podcasts. And and my book that just came out, Skip the Line, it's got basically 23 different techniques relating to learning things super quickly. In particular, I describe how you can use experiments on your life to quickly skip the line. But then also I talk about how do you monetize once you skip the line. So I talk about, basically about a third of the book is all these different ways to monetize. And I've helped a lot of people do this. Like, for a while I was pitching there's this one last story. I was pitching a TV show, and it was called I Will Make You a Millionaire. And I basically would take any random person and within 6 months either make them a millionaire or on the path to millions. And all the TV networks loved it, the idea, but they were afraid to take a chance. What if I didn't succeed? And they filmed this whole thing and spent millions of dollars and it didn't work. So didn't really work. But I am going to do it as an experiment to show how the techniques in this book work. So I'm going to.
I will be one of your subjects. I'm random. Pick me.
All right, you're random. Maybe I will pick you.
Random enough. You just met me. It's fine.
Well,
oh my gosh.
What are you going to be doing in Georgia? What are you going to be doing for a living in Georgia?
So my husband is still doing the same thing for a living. I write books and I coach and that's what I do. And I podcast. It went from being a lawyer to writing books and podcasting. So totally different lifestyle, not making millions. So,
but I bet you could get on the path to that. And
oh yeah.
So
I bet you too. And I've got my third book proposal ready to go to my, my editor next week. So I would love to experiment with my third book. Let's do it.
What's the third book about?
Well, so it's going to be called The Suck Line, and it's a time management concept I came up with years ago that basically it does away with your to-do list and you take everything that really matters and it goes above this line you draw, and everything under that line, while it's on a list, everything under that line sucks for a period of a week or two. And then after 2 weeks, you get to move it up. So it's a time management system for really busy women who are like tied to their to-do list as like some sort of albatross around their neck. So it helps you manage, but it helps you keep your priorities, things above the suck line, never fall below. So like,
what if there's priorities so you never get to the suck line?
What if what?
What if there are always things that are higher priority than the suck line?
Well, it doesn't work out that way though, because the things that really, really, really matter to you are very small.
Yeah. All right. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And have you thought of like some kind of app to remind people of priorities or to help people figure out priorities?
Not yet. I got to write this book.
You can even learn your priorities by basically what you mark as priorities. It could start to use kind of AI to learn what might be a priority.
Right. Because like when you take women are like, my to-do list is crazy. But when you cull it down, it's like, where is your health on this list? Where are the people you love? Like they're nowhere to be found. But then your to-do list just continues to grow and you never accomplish anything. So things from the to-do list, like getting your hair done, taking the dog to the vet, going to the dentist, those go on the list at some point. And at some point they have to go above the suck line because it matters that you take your dog to the vet. It matters that you go to the dentist. But how do you manage that to-do list? And so I have a system that I've got to flesh out in this book about how you do that based on your dreams, your priorities, the people in your life. And it's sort of a sequel to my other book, my last book, The Year of No Nonsense, which is about eliminating any nonsense in your life and finding what really matters. And what really matters fits in a nice little small box. It really does. So
that's really interesting. I'm gonna read the book. I'm gonna look on Amazon right now. Maybe I could pre-order.
I will send you a copy.
All right.
You're not gonna find my Suckline book though, because I'm literally like, it's getting pitched. So.
Well, I am buying right now The Year of No Nonsense.
Don't buy it. I'll send you a copy.
No, authors deserve to get paid. So,
well, that is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me on this podcast. In real time. Oh my gosh.
Well,
yeah. So
again, Meredith, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And
thank you. It was so fun.
I appreciate it.
Hi, and welcome to the Same 24 Hours podcast. I'm Meredith Atwood, author of the book, The Year of No Nonsense. I'm a former attorney turned writer, speaker, and Ironman triathlete. Although right now, all I really like to do is lift weights. We all have the same 24 hours, but it's what we do in those hours that leads to our greatest health, happiness, and success. It's my goal to crack the code on a life of less nonsense so we can all make the most of our 24 hours. So let's get started.